Welcome to the Own It Powercast, the place to be when you get serious about making big changes and accelerating growth in your life and in your relationships. Finally create the life you've always wanted, living life on your own terms. Learn how to take your fear and turn it into powerful choices that will create sustained change. Now your host, Mary Baker.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Own It Powercast, a place where you can come to get what you need to move yourself forward. Hey, it's Mary Baker. Welcome to episode 102. It's all about relationships and how to tell if yours is healthy. All right, so this month, we're going to be looking at what makes a relationship relatively healthy, because there's no perfect, and how to assess the ones you're in. Each week, we're going to look at different aspects to this, since I think each one is so important and is a discussion in and of themselves. Because here's the thing, we can often overlook some missing healthy puzzle pieces simply because we convince ourselves that it isn't that awful, they don't beat me, they have money, they're nice to others, etc., etc. So we don't see it. That's why what we want to define this month is that all the pieces matter. Every one of them. Today is just going to be kind of an overview of what we're going to get into in more depth in the coming weeks. So for years, I've been working with individuals, families, couples, and groups, and at the end of the day, mainly about healthy relationships. I've learned a great deal from those experiences as a counselor, teacher, and coach, because my clients are always teaching me and showing me, sadly, how destructive, unhealthy behavior, mainly individual unhealthy behavior, can ruin a relationship and have huge impacts on a person's self-esteem, can cause trauma, and affect every other area of their life. In fact, I don't think there's a more important environment besides the environment for us to look at. So this month, we're going to explore the differences between good dynamics and not so good ones and why. All right, so today let's take a look at what I'm talking about. Now, I've chosen some of the big topics for this month. I just want to remind us that, there's so much more to the story, and I'm not trying to pretend that there isn't. But these are some ones that I chose to focus on this month of June. So one episode we're going to devote to crazy making manipulation, passive-aggressive behaviors. What do we think is toxic and why? How is it toxic? What kind of damage does it do? I think this is a really important topic. I think it is one of the most destructive behaviors that I have seen in relationships, and I've pretty much seen them all at this point. And probably because it isn't as obvious. Physical abuse, as awful as it is, someone stealing money from you, someone berating you in a restaurant where everyone can see it. Everyone saw that. You're not crazy. It is happening. It's very real. It's awful, but it's real. It's the crazy making that happens from passive-aggressive behavior and manipulation that is so destructive, because eventually you lose self-trust. You lose connection with who you are, what you really think, what you really feel, what your boundaries are. And it takes a long time to get that back, because I help people do that. And the damage is amazing. Okay, so we're going to look at manipulation. We're going to look at passive-aggressive behavior, like guilting, like putting your stuff on other people, because it's not just losing you, but you're going to lose connection. You can't have great connection when you have passive-aggressive behavior in a relationship, because we can't connect unless we're being emotionally honest and real and vulnerable. I also think we can't connect unless we're connecting with the truth and in the truth. Our emotional truth, the truth about what's going on between us. And you can't grow and be yourself, and neither can they. So we're going to look at the destructiveness of manipulation. We're going to look at passive-aggressive behavior, where people smile and say, sure, and they people please and they don't follow through because, quote unquote, oops, they forgot, kind of thing. There's incongruence, there's inconsistency, there's irresponsibility. That's a big piece of manipulation too. And it doesn't just have to be your kid, it could be your spouse or your colleague or your sister manipulating, making it impossible for them to take responsibility, creating situations where there's rescuing going on. Another big danger of having manipulation in relationships is even if you and person A have a decent relationship, person B outside of the relationship may be manipulating you or manipulating them to do what we call pit and split, to pit you two against one another and to split you up. It's extremely powerful for the manipulator to be able to do this. And I've seen the damage. It's very dangerous. So we have to talk about that too. So that's what we're going to spend one episode looking at that. And sadly, we probably need 5 episodes to really dive in deep. So we'll probably do more in the future. So that leads us into the next episode that we're going to do about boundaries. Because with passive aggressive behavior manipulation, that's the problem. There aren't any boundaries in that relationship. People are not taking responsibility. And if you don't have boundaries, you're not going to have trust. Okay? I just don't believe that is possible. Instead, you're going to have unreliability. You're going to have an imbalance where one person does a lot in the relationship and the other person reaps what you're sowing. Maybe there's imbalance in terms of responsibility and taking care of things, working on the relationship. Maybe there's only room for one person's feelings and needs. Is there a lot of rescuing going on? Well, I know one thing, there's sure to be chaos if there isn't boundaries. And we'll talk about that more deeply in that episode. And also be sure to check out previous episodes we've done on boundaries if you need to or just need a refresher. But boundaries are essentially where you end and other people begin. Where you take responsibility for what you think, feel, need, do, believe, and choose. And you step back and allow others the benefits and the consequences of their own choices, of what they want to act upon, what they want to believe, what they want to choose, and what they want to choose to do for self. And we don't get in there and try to manage that for them because that's being controlling. It is really technically a form of manipulation because you're trying to manipulate that outcome. And 9 times out of 10, we're doing it out of love or fear or both. It's because we care and we're worried. You parents out there know exactly what I'm talking about. But with boundaries, we let go and we focus on what we can control, which is us only. So it's where you end and others begin. And allowing others to figure it out and bang their head along the way and decide for themselves. Because here's the other reason I don't think without boundaries we can have trust is because unless and until they decide that it's a problem, that they decide they want to get it together, that they decide they want to grow up on the inside, that they decide they want to treat you better. Until they decide and act upon that and change it, it's not real anyway, now is it? Because just because you doesn't mean they. Just because you want them to see how it would be so great if they changed that behavior, if they made more money, if they got sober, if they were more emotionally mature. But then it belongs to you, now doesn't it? And you'll never not be anxious about them really wanting to do this and really following through and maintaining change because it was your idea. Which technically is a form of manipulation. I had to do it because you wanted me to kind of thing. Gosh, if you ever hear that statement, run the other way. That person is so not ready to take responsibility. Boundaries are all about taking responsibility for what is yours and coming to acceptance. So here comes grief work, right? Coming to acceptance around whatever is going on for the other person. It's not about them. It's what you perhaps cannot accept about them. Because you have to figure out, well, if I accept that behavior, then what? We're also going to talk about boundaries in your communication. because I think everything is communicated via our communication. We're going to get into the semantics and the nuances that really matter, because how we say things speaks volumes about our differentiation, or, our healthy separateness, our emotional maturity or lack thereof, our ability to be vulnerable, and whether we have boundaries or not. Because if we guilt and shame, it's never a sign of good boundaries. Or if we can instead own our feelings, own our behavior, and are able to express empathy for how it must feel to be on the other side of our ridiculousness right now, then we get it. That is a sign of maturity. Without good boundaries in communication, you'll see lots of conflict and nothing gets resolved. Usually it goes back under the carpet for, 2 to 3 weeks, maybe 3 months, and the same issues keep coming up and keep coming up. Another boundary issue is because things aren't being taken care of. The right person is not taking responsibility for what belongs to them, and you can't fix that for them, and they can't fix your stuff. So boundaries in communication, how we talk to one another, shows ownership or not, shows respect of their boundaries or not, and that's why it's so important. Because without boundaries in communication, you're not going to have safe communication, which is our next episode, emotional safety and connection. So if you look at it in terms of layers, I think trust is at the bottom, is the most foundational layer, and we have healthier boundaries. Each person takes responsibility for self. We have trust there. We've made agreements and we've shown each other we can be trustworthy. So then it's safe. And then we will start to perhaps open up and be vulnerable and be more compassionate and share on deeper levels and create really healthy, strong bonds. So what do I mean by emotional safety and connection? Well, it means you can turn to one another for support and connection. You get each other. You can be vulnerable. You can be open. You can be scared with them. You can share with them what you are so ashamed of. You can share how angry you are at something shitty that just happened. You can share how you're angry at yourself. You can share your curiosity and your awe and your excitement and your joy. So there's vulnerability, there is transparency. Intimacy is into me see, I let you in. But in order to do that, there's healthy detachment because we've already worked on boundaries. So you're allowed to have your feelings and they don't make your feelings about them. That's a big deal. Nothing will shut it down quicker than someone saying, I can't believe you're angry with me, I can't handle it. Or I don't know what to do to make you feel better. Wow. Instead, there's great use of empathy and compassion. I can see you're really hurting. I'm so sorry there isn't anything better I can say, but I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. Emotional safety and connection means there's no control. We've done some episodes on control and communication. Control is the opposite of boundaries. There's no control in emotionally safe communication because there's choice. People are owning their choices. There are healthy boundaries. There's letting go. There's allowing. And there's allowing reality to play out too, which is not always easy. These relationships have ground rules that we follow and we can talk about them. We can actually sit down and talk about how we treat each other, how we talk to one another, what is okay to do and what's not. And then we follow those ground rules. We show each other that we took that seriously and it matters. So there's mutual regard and respect. There is respect and there is acceptance. You don't have to agree with what she's got going on to accept it. In fact, it's hard when someone you love is doing some things that make you worry about them a little bit. You don't want them to fall. You don't want them to be hurt. You don't want them to hurt others, including you. You want to have things differently with them in the relationship. But acceptance has got to come first. And so we have to do the grief work to get to acceptance. I don't think we can provide a lot of emotional safety and connection in our relationships if we have not been willing to learn how to grieve and actually grieve some things. That's a big deal. And speaking of that, our final episode of the month will be commitment to growth and taking personal responsibility for that growth. The individual work. All the relationships I have worked with over the years, ironically, the ones that get healthy and stay healthy are ones where each person was willing to look in the mirror and do that hard individual work. We have to do that first, or we cannot pull off trying to be any kind of partner or friend or spouse or sibling or colleague. We can't. We don't have the emotional maturity. All our defense mechanisms get in the way. We don't have good boundaries. We don't know how to grieve and let go. We act it out instead. I mean, I could go on and on as to why. So whether it's grief or trauma work, working on their self-esteem, finding their purpose, learning how to adapt when life throws them curveballs, learning how to be a good roommate and not be so damn self-absorbed. They also don't hang on the cross. They practice decent self-care, not perfectly, but on average. They're into growing. They're into changing when necessary. And they're always into evolving. They have humility. They have openness, the willingness to learn. And they don't put their stuff on others. You always hear me talk about personal responsibility. You're responsible for what you feel, what you do to take care of yourself, for your choices, and for all the work we just talked about that you might need to do. If you're doing that and they're doing that, then you share that value around the commitment to growth and the commitment to be responsible. They also take responsibility for finding and maintaining good support systems, and not just people who would tell them what they want to hear either, or compartmentalize their people. Some people know some stuff about them, and other people don't know that, but they know other things. We compartmentalize because we haven't integrated all that stuff about ourselves, and we're so afraid if we got all our friends and family in the room, if everyone knew everything, would they still love us? Or will we be abandoned? Would they hate us? Good friends don't overstep, but they might ask some tough questions, or your brother might point out some things you might not want to look at. It's because they love you enough to do the tough love thing, which is real love, by the way, because they don't want to lie to you, and they can't co-sign the lie anymore. So good support. People who know you and love you anyway. People who help you grow because they also are working on themselves and not afraid to do that. So they are also evolving. So those are some of the deeper topics we're going to get into. So I want to take a moment now and talk about what does healthier really look like? And you hear me use the relative term healthier. There's no perfect, and I want to get out of the black and white, perfect and horrible stuff if you struggle with that. Good enough is good enough. Healthier looks like healthy boundaries, like we mentioned earlier. Your internal boundaries, your self-discipline, and external boundaries. So being able to say no to ourselves and to hear no and say no to others. People own their feelings. They own their behaviors and their choices. They don't put their choices on other people. There's a feeling of freedom. There's no hostage taking here. And what I mean by that is, we can be held hostage by a partner who refuses to pull their weight. We can be held hostage by someone's addiction, their chaos, their self-injury, their unwillingness to get help with their depression. There's a big list out there. So without boundaries, there can be hostage-taking scenarios, and they're not good. Healthier looks like assertiveness and good self-esteem, and those two go hand in hand. There's no passive-aggressive behavior. There's ownership. There's directness. There's honesty. And there's congruence. Your walk matches your talk. And you don't 180 on people next Tuesday and give them a whole different answer. And they don't make you guess what's going on with them or mind read. They mean what they say, and they own what they say, and they own what they do. Healthier looks like kindness. And that's an inside-out job. Kindness and compassion and empathy. We have to be able to give those things to ourselves before we can truly give them to each other. Healthier looks like healthy separateness, able to spend some time apart and actually enjoy that. There's playfulness. You can be silly with one another. You can be silly with others. You can be in awe. You can be curious. You can goof off at times. You can learn together. You love to learn individually, and you like to share the learning. You help each other grow. You encourage growth in the other. You practice growth for yourself, so you model it. And that becomes one of your shared values. And healthy relationships do have shared values. How many times over the years I've run into relationships where one person put parts of them on a shelf to be there. It never ended well. You can only go against yourself for so long. And so we're responsible for knowing what our values are and making sure that we nurture relationships where we share values with them. The non-negotiable stuff. In healthier relationships, there's a lot of empathy and detachment. You allow each other to have your feelings, but you can also put yourself in their shoes and not make it about you all the time. There's commitment. You can count on each other. When you make agreements, you follow through on them. There's trust because there's personal responsibility. A big one is there's no fear in this relationship. There's no fear when you need to be vulnerable or you need to confront or you need to ask for what you need to set a boundary, that it's going to go south. That's going to get toxic. There's going to be manipulation. People are going to manipulate you with rage. They're going to shut down. They're going to get defensive. There should not be fear in our relationships, ever, ever. And finally, there's room for both of you in the relationship, and you're not being selfish. We try to honor them without dishonoring ourselves. So choose to honor is what I call it. You choose to honor what they say they need because it's valid, while also asking them for what you need and taking care of yourself. All right, so we're going to close out by doing an exercise because as you're hearing all of this, my hope is that you're doing an overview assessment of kind of where you are and where your relationships are. So if you're not familiar with sentence stems, I'm going to give you a beginning of a thought, and I want you to think about what immediately comes up for you in the first nanosecond to finish this sentence. Now, often there's more than one ending, and that's cool. And sometimes there's conflicting messages. Don't worry about that. That just points to our internal conflict, or we're still trying to work through all the angles, and that's okay. So if you're in a place where you can write these down, that's wonderful. Those of you who get the newsletter, this will be a PDF in there, so you'll have it as a download. But right now, if you're walking or just listening or you're busy driving or what have you, just see what comes up in your heart. All right. Number 1, if I were to take a really honest look at my relationships, if I were to take an honest look at my relationships, Number 2, when I look at how I struggle to be healthier. When I look at how I struggle to be healthier. Number 3, the things my family has taught me about relating to each other. The things my family has taught me about relating to each other. And number 4, vulnerability to me means. Vulnerability to me means. Okay, so take a moment and think about what came up for you. How you feel about that. If you were surprised by any of your answers, or maybe you've already explored these things before. I always think we can benefit from looking at more and more layers as we go. So sometimes we cannot see the unhealthy in our relationships, either until others point it out or something awful happens. Maybe the conflict gets worse or the consequences become too big to rationalize or ignore anymore. But that's why it's so important to keep learning and keep assessing where you are and where others are in terms of personal growth. Because we have to look at where they are and understand the reality. They may not be ready to give you healthier right now. There are things they have to look at, change, walk through, heal. Practice. So today we talked about how this month we're going to be getting into the details that define healthy and unhealthy relationships. My hope is that this month you can do some thinking and some realizing where yours might be. And I also hope that as you continue to uncover things and process them, you will feel more grounded and sane, because it will all start to make better sense. All the symptoms and all the origins and everything you need to do to make it healthier. Thank you so much for joining me today. May you be aware and grounded and open. Hold on to hope. Focus on the good in people this week. Be sure to check the show notes at ownitpowercast.com. Sign up for the newsletter if you don't already get it. Comes out every Tuesday. That's where the bonus downloads are for the past episodes too, if you're just joining us here now. All right, so pay it forward, keep focusing on you, and I'll see you next time.
We hope you took away some useful insights and tools you can begin using right away. If you did, please leave a positive review and share on your social media. Because could you imagine if everyone in your life really got it together? Remember, own it now, so you can really own it later.